I found my daughter crying in the closet, while her husband's laughter echoed downstairs. My heart froze. In that moment, I knew something was terribly, unforgivably wrong. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it's traveled. The first thing I remember is the sound of my own breath. Ragged, uneven, too loud for a house that felt suddenly too quiet. Sfex, faint laughter downstairs. And then the laughter carried up through the floorboards, warm and careless like a celebration. That's when I knew something was wrong. My daughter was nowhere in sight, and yet the house didn't feel empty. It felt divided. Upstairs was fear. Downstairs was arrogance. I turned the hallway corner and saw the closet door, just barely cracked, a thin line of darkness leaking out. My hand hesitated on the knob. You know that moment when your body knows the truth before your mind can? When every instinct begs you not to look, not to confirm the nightmare you already suspect? That was me, standing there trembling like a child. But I opened it anyway. She was there. My daughter, my beautiful girl, crumpled against the back wall like she had been shoved into the shadows themselves. Her knees were drawn to her chest, her eyes swollen red, her breath so shaky she could barely whisper. And when she finally did, it was just one broken sentence. Please, don't let him find me. Those words will never leave me. They carved into me like glass. I froze. For a second, I wasn't her mother. I was a coward. I wanted to slam the door shut, to run away, to pretend I hadn't seen. Because seeing meant admitting I had failed her. All those dinners where I smiled across the table, telling myself she was happy. All those phone calls where her voice sounded thin and strained, and I brushed it off as tiredness. How many signs had I ignored? How many cries had I silenced with my own denial? She looked at me like I was her last hope, and the shame of that nearly killed me. I whispered her name, reached for her, and she flinched. My daughter flinched at me. That's when I realized it wasn't just bruises on her skin. It was deeper, etched into her spirit. He had broken something inside her, something I wasn't sure I could fix. Downstairs, the sound of clinking glasses and forced laughter grew louder, like some cruel reminder that while she hid here, he celebrated there. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't sorry. He was hosting, toasting, living freely. And that knowledge, his audacity, his smugness, ignited something in me I hadn't felt in years. Rage. I held her trembling hands, whispering promises I wasn't sure how to keep. You're safe. I'm here. He won't touch you again. My words felt paper thin, fragile against the storm I could see in her eyes. But I had to say them, because if I didn't, she might stop believing in safety altogether. She begged me not to go downstairs, begged me to stay hidden with her, to let the night pass unnoticed. But how could I? How could I listen to his laughter and do nothing? He thought no one saw. He thought his cruelty was his little secret, tucked neatly behind a charming smile and a polished reputation. He was wrong. I closed the closet door behind us and sat there on the floor, holding her in the dark. Her tears soaked through my blouse, hot and relentless. I stroked her hair, just like I did when she was a little girl, when monsters were nothing but shadows in the room. But this monster was real. And worse, he was family. I pressed my forehead to hers and whispered, "This ends tonight." She shook her head, terrified, whispering, "No, Mom. Don't." But my decision was already made. Something inside me had snapped into place. He thought he could laugh while my daughter cried. He thought he could toast his victories while she hid in fear. But he forgot one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. And I don't forgive. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there on the floor with her, rocking her gently, like maybe I could rock time backward, back to when she was a little girl in pigtails who thought closets were for hide and seek, not hiding from her husband. Her body was still trembling against me, and I could feel her heartbeat fluttering fast, like a trapped bird. She tried to speak. Her lips moved, but her voice caught, choked by fear. Finally, a whisper came out. He'll hear us. That was the moment I realized the depth of her prison. She wasn't just afraid of him finding her. She was afraid of existing in the same house as him. She was afraid of breathing too loud. And in my gut, a cold truth formed. I had missed it all. I tilted her chin up and looked at her face. Her makeup had smeared into dark rivers, but it wasn't enough to hide the faint yellow bruise along her jaw. My breath caught. I had seen that mark before, weeks ago when she claimed she'd slipped on the kitchen floor. She'd laughed it off, and I, blind fool that I was, had laughed with her. I whispered, "How long?" She shook her head, eyes darting like a cornered animal. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to run downstairs and drag him out by the throat. But I couldn't scare her more than she already was. So instead, I held my tongue and let her press her forehead against my shoulder. Downstairs, music played. A cheerful song, upbeat, like a cruel soundtrack to our misery. Og's faint music drifting up. I could hear glasses clinking, people talking, laughter erupting every so often. He was entertaining guests. And I thought, does anyone down there know? Does anyone care? Or were they all fooled by his mask, the charming husband, the perfect host? The thought made me sick. I leaned close and whispered, "I'll get you out of here." Her eyes widened in panic. "No, Mom, if you try, he'll—" She stopped herself, but the way her voice broke was enough. My blood ran hot. What had he threatened her with? What had he done to silence her so completely? I took a breath, trying to steady myself. I wanted to rage. I wanted to storm downstairs and end it all right there. But rage wouldn't protect her. Not yet. If I made one wrong move, he'd tighten his grip around her until she couldn't breathe. I had to be smarter than him, so I shifted. From mother to strategist. From guilt to calculation. I kissed the top of her head, just like I used to when she was little, and I said softly, "Then we'll do this my way." I pulled out my phone, pretending to scroll, but really I was listening, counting how many voices floated up from the living room. 4, maybe 5. They were laughing with him, trusting him, enjoying his hospitality, while the truth rotted upstairs in a closet. I thought of all the holidays he'd sat across from me, carving the turkey, pouring the wine. All the times he called me Mom with that easy smile, like he belonged. I felt bile rise in my throat. He'd fooled me. Worse, I had let him fool me. And my daughter paid the price. I whispered again. "This isn't forever. Tonight you're safe with me." She squeezed my hand like she didn't believe me, but wanted to. And then, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, moving up the stairs. My daughter stiffened, panic flooding her eyes. She clutched at my arm with desperate strength. The footsteps paused in the hallway. The music downstairs dimmed beneath the pounding in my chest. He was coming. I held my breath, every muscle taut, my hand still gripping the closet door handle. If he opened it now, if he saw us here together, everything would unravel. The footsteps stopped right outside. I could see the thin slice of light at the crack of the closet door flicker as his shadow moved across it. My daughter's nails dug into my arm, sharp and trembling. I pressed my finger to my lips, silently begging her to stay quiet, even though her sobs threatened to burst free. And then, knock. Just one slow, deliberate tap on the doorframe. Not the closet, but the wall beside it. He knew someone was up here. He wanted to remind the house who it belonged to. "Sweetheart?" His voice slid through the silence, calm and smooth, but it made my skin crawl. He sounded so normal, so gentle, like the kind of man who'd bring flowers home after work. But I had seen the bruises. I was holding the proof in my arms. I didn't answer. Neither did she. The footsteps lingered a moment longer. I could almost hear his smirk in the quiet, like he was daring us to make a sound. And then, slowly, he walked back down the stairs. Each creak of wood felt like a countdown, but finally the music swallowed him again. My daughter collapsed against me in relief, shaking harder than before. Her body knew what my mind was just beginning to grasp. He wasn't just cruel. He was careful, calculated. He didn't rage blindly. He controlled every step, every word, every pause. That made him more dangerous. I stroked her hair and whispered, We'll wait. We'll be smart. But inside, I was screaming. I had never felt so powerless in my life, hiding in my own child's home, listening to her tormentor entertain guests below. Every instinct told me to fight, to storm down there and end it. But I couldn't, not yet. Not while she clung to me like a lifeline, terrified that one wrong move would bring his wrath crashing down on her. So I stayed. Minutes felt like hours. My mind wandered places it didn't want to go. Memories of her wedding day, when I watched her walk down the aisle in white, glowing with a smile I thought was love. I remembered the way he kissed her hand. So tender, so convincing. I had cried that day, believing I was giving her to a man who would protect her. Instead, I had delivered her into the arms of a wolf. The shame of that nearly suffocated me. Finally, the party downstairs grew louder again. He had turned his attention back to his guests, his voice carrying, laughter booming like nothing in the world was wrong. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. We were safe, at least for the moment. I shifted, pulling her face up so she could see me. Her eyes were glassy, rimmed with red, her mascara smudged like black stains of grief. She looked so much younger than her years, like the girl I used to tuck in at night. I said quietly but firmly, "I need you to trust me." She shook her head. "He'll find out." "He always finds out." Her voice cracked, and my heart split clean in two. But I couldn't let her fear rule me. I was her mother. If I didn't fight for her, who would? I pulled her close again, whispering into her hair. "Then we won't give him the chance. We'll play his game, until it's time to end it." Her body stiffened, like she didn't fully understand what I meant. But I knew. Deep down, I already had the seed of a plan. He thought he held all the power. He thought no one would ever stand up to him. But he had underestimated the one thing stronger than his control: a mother's wrath. As the music downstairs swelled, I closed my eyes and made a silent promise. Tonight I would stay quiet for her sake. Tonight I would wait. But soon, very soon, his laughter would be silenced. And when it was, the world would finally see him for what he really was. The next morning, the house looked different. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting everything in soft gold, but it felt like a lie. Nothing about this house was warm. Nothing about it was safe. My daughter moved quietly through the kitchen, her body tense, shoulders hunched like she was waiting for a blow. And there he was, her husband, sitting at the table with a smile so smooth it could fool the devil himself. "Morning," he said, like the night before hadn't happened. Like she hadn't spent hours crying in my arms, hiding in a closet while he played the perfect host. His tone was casual, affectionate even, but I saw her flinch. That tiny movement told me everything. I sat across from him, studying his face. He buttered his toast with steady hands, his jaw relaxed, his eyes bright. Not a trace of guilt. If anything, he looked proud of himself, like he had already won. And maybe, in his mind, he had. He glanced at me and smiled. "Sleep well?" I swallowed the rage burning in my throat. I wanted to spit the truth right at him, wanted to slam my fist against the table and scream, "I know what you've done." But I didn't, not yet. Instead, I nodded and forced a tight smile. Fine. His arrogance was blinding. He thought his mask was flawless. He thought I couldn't see through it. But I could. Every casual word, every smooth gesture, it all dripped with control. He wasn't asking me about sleep. He was testing me, gauging whether I had noticed anything, whether I suspected, and I knew right then, this table wasn't just a place to eat. It was his stage. My daughter poured coffee, her hands trembling so badly that the cup rattled against the saucer. He shot her a look, not sharp, not loud, just a glance. But it froze her in place. She whispered, "Sorry," like she had committed a crime. My stomach twisted, I couldn't take it. I reached over and steadied her hand, murmuring, "It's fine, sweetheart." She gave me a weak smile, but I saw the fear flicker in her eyes. Fear that even my comfort might earn his silent punishment later. He cleared his throat, leaning back in his chair. "We're having dinner with some friends tonight," he announced. "I want everything perfect." The way he said it, "I want," wasn't a request. It was law. My daughter nodded quickly, her eyes cast down. And me, I said nothing, because I understood something in that moment. The dinner table wasn't just where he fed his body. It was where he fed his power, and I knew what I had to do. If he wanted perfection, if he wanted control, then I would use it against him. I would play the guest, the observer, the silent witness. But every smile I gave, every nod I offered would hide the truth simmering inside me. I would gather pieces, gather moments, gather cracks in his mask. Because one day soon, I would tear it off in front of everyone. I looked at him across the table, forcing my lips to curve into something resembling warmth. He thought he was the predator, and maybe he was. But he didn't know I had claws of my own. The knife scraped against his plate as he cut into his toast, and the sound made my daughter flinch again. I memorized it, the sound, her reaction, his smirk. Every detail mattered. Every crack in the facade was another weapon I could use. I leaned back, sipping my coffee slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact with him. He raised an eyebrow, almost amused, like he was trying to figure me out. Let him try. Because while he played his little games at the dinner table, I was already planning the day he would choke on his own lies. That evening, the dining room gleamed like a stage set for a play. Candles flickered, casting soft light across polished silverware and spotless glasses. My daughter moved quickly, almost silently, placing dishes with careful precision. Every detail mattered to her, because every mistake would matter to him. I watched her fuss over the napkins, folding and refolding them until her hands shook. "It's fine," I whispered, trying to calm her. But she shook her head. "You don't understand. It has to be perfect." And then I did understand. The dinner table wasn't just a stage for him, it was a test for her. A single wrong move, and she would pay for it later, when the guests were gone and the house fell silent. When the doorbell rang, he transformed instantly. "Ach," cheerful greeting. His smile widened, his voice boomed with warmth, his arms opened wide for his friends. To anyone else, he was the perfect host. To me, it was theater. I had seen what was behind the curtain. Guests filled the room, laughing, complimenting the food, praising the decor. My daughter smiled, nodded, answered politely, but I could see the tension in her eyes, the way she froze whenever his hand touched her shoulder, as if his grip left invisible bruises. I sat at the far end of the table, quiet, watching, studying. He commanded the room effortlessly, telling stories, cracking jokes, sipping his wine with practiced ease. Every laugh he earned, every admiring glance made bile rise in my throat. These people adored him. They couldn't see the fear sitting right beside him, dressed up in a polite smile and shaking hands. At one point, a guest complimented the roast. "Perfect as always," they said. He chuckled, patting my daughter's hand. "She's a natural." "I don't know what I'd do without her," the table laughed. My daughter lowered her head, hiding her eyes. "And me?" I nearly dropped my fork from the force of my rage. Because I knew what he'd do without her. He'd break her. Piece by piece, until there was nothing left. I caught her gaze across the table. For the briefest moment, she looked at me like a drowning woman spotting a lifeboat. But then his voice filled the room again, and she looked away. I made myself laugh at one of his jokes, the sound bitter in my throat. I knew I couldn't tip my hand too soon. He thrived on control, and if he sensed mine slipping in, he'd tighten his hold on her. So I smiled. I laughed. I played along. But while everyone else drank his wine and praised his charm, I took mental notes. Every word, every gesture, every glance he threw at her when he thought no one was watching. And then came the moment that changed everything. One of the guests raised a glass, praising him for his promotion at work. The table erupted in cheers, clinking glasses together. My daughter smiled weakly, clapping her hands because that's what was expected. But when I looked at her closely, I saw it. The tiniest flicker of pain in her eyes. like the cheer itself hurt. I followed her gaze and saw it too. A small, fading bruise just above her wrist, half hidden under her sleeve. My stomach clenched. He had grabbed her, hard, recently, and yet here he sat, basking in admiration, while she hid her wounds under candlelight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the tablecloth and yank it, send his perfect dinner crashing to the floor. But instead, I held my breath and swallowed the fury burning inside me. Because I realized something powerful that night. He was building his image higher and higher, brick by brick. And the higher he built it, the harder he would fall when I pulled it all down. So I smiled at him across the flickering table, my heart pounding with secrets. He thought he had silenced her, but he had forgotten about me. The meal stretched on, course after course, and I felt every second like a weight pressing against my chest. Laughter echoed, glasses clinked, the air thick with wine and easy conversation. To anyone else, it was a picture-perfect evening. But beneath the surface, I saw the cracks. He thrived in this spotlight, soaking up every compliment like it was fuel. He leaned back in his chair, one arm draped casually around my daughter's shoulders. To the guests, it looked affectionate. To me, it was possession. She sat stiff, her smile brittle, her eyes dimming each time his hand tightened just slightly against her arm. I forced myself to eat, though every bite tasted like ash. I studied him, memorizing the rhythm of his lies, the patterns of his charm. He spoke about work, about new projects, about promotions. The table hung on his every word, as though he were some brilliant success story. And maybe he was, on the outside. But I knew better. I looked at my daughter again, watched the way her fork trembled as she lifted it to her lips. She was silent, shrinking into herself, fading beneath his shadow. And for the first time that night, something inside me shifted. I realized this wasn't just about rage or revenge. This was about survival. Hers. A guest leaned over to me at one point, smiling warmly. "You must be proud of them. Such a beautiful couple." I nearly choked. Proud? Proud of a man who carved fear into my daughter's heart? Proud of a marriage that was nothing but chains wrapped in lace? I forced a nod, pressing my lips into a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Inside, my answer was very different. I am not proud. I am furious. The night dragged on, but slowly his mask began to slip in tiny ways. A sharp glance when she dropped her napkin. A clenched jaw when she poured his wine too slowly. No one else noticed. It was too subtle, too practiced. But I noticed. I saw how she froze under his gaze, how her body tensed like she was bracing for something. And that was when I understood his greatest weakness: arrogance. He believed no one saw. He believed no one cared enough to look. But I was looking, and I cared more than he could ever imagine. Later, as dessert was served, he leaned close to whisper something in her ear. I didn't hear the words, but I saw her reaction. Her smile faltered, her eyes filled with something sharp and wet. Whatever he said, it cut her deep. And then, as if nothing had happened, he turned back to the guests with another dazzling grin. I clenched my hands in my lap until my nails dug into my skin. My mind whispered dangerous thoughts. Stand up. Expose him now. Tell them what you saw, what you know. But another voice answered back. Not yet. Not like this. If you strike too soon, he'll twist it. He'll make you look like the liar. And she'll be left with nothing but his anger, so I stayed quiet. For her. For now. When the last guest finally left, the house grew silent. My daughter gathered plates, her shoulders slumped, exhaustion written all over her face. He kissed her cheek as he passed by, muttering something I couldn't hear. She nodded, eyes down, moving quickly to the sink. I lingered at the table, staring at the flickering candles, now nearly burned down to stubs. This table had witnessed everything: his charm, her fear, my silence. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. One day, this same table would witness his undoing, because you can only wear a mask for so long. Eventually, the fire beneath it burns through, and when it did, I would be there to make sure everyone saw the monster he really was. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Silence in her voice, silence in the way she moved around him, silence in my own chest as I fought the urge to scream. But silence can be deceiving. Beneath it, things stir. Secrets wait. And I began to notice them. It started with the phone. One afternoon, my daughter left it on the counter while she stepped into the other room. The screen lit up, cracked in the corner, a spiderweb of glass across the edge. I picked it up gently, and something inside me twisted. She had never been careless with her things. Every scratch, every dent on that phone spoke of force, of impact, of someone who wanted to leave a mark. When she came back, she snatched it quickly, too quickly, her eyes darting to me. "It fell," she said, her voice too flat, too rehearsed. I didn't argue. I just nodded, but inside I screamed. Later that night, I found a receipt tucked into the trash can. It was from a pharmacy, for ointments and bandages. Her name was on it. She hadn't mentioned being hurt. She hadn't mentioned a thing. And why would she? Every time she spoke, she risked his shadow falling heavier over her. Piece by piece, I started collecting these small fragments. A bruise she explained away as clumsiness. A dress she never wore again because the fabric tore at the shoulder. A bottle of concealer emptied too fast. To anyone else, they were nothing. To me, they were proof. But the most damning thing came one night, when the house was quiet and I couldn't sleep. I heard it through the vent, his voice, low and sharp, cutting through the walls like a blade. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. His tone wasn't the voice he used at the dinner table, not the voice of the perfect host. It was venom laced with control, and then I heard her. Not words, just the soft, muffled sound of someone trying not to cry. That sound tore through me. I pressed my hand to the wall, powerless, knowing she was only feet away and still out of reach. The next morning, she smiled at breakfast. A smile so forced, so fragile, it was like glass about to shatter. He poured her coffee, kissed her cheek, and to the world they were the picture of love. But I had heard the truth through the walls. I had collected the evidence he thought would stay hidden in shadows, and with every piece I gathered, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just anger anymore. It was purpose. I began writing things down, small notes in a notebook I kept tucked in my bag. Dates, times, bruises, slips of the mask. I knew one day I would need it. He was too careful, too clever. To bring him down, I'd need more than rage. I'd need proof. But even as I built my case, I felt the weight of guilt pressing on me. Why hadn't I seen it sooner? Why had I smiled at their wedding, toasted their future, believed in his lies? I thought of all the times she had called me, her voice thin and distant, and I had told her she sounded tired. No, she had been crying and I hadn't heard it. That guilt fueled me. It sharpened me, because now I couldn't change the past, but I could shape what came next. I closed my notebook one night and whispered to myself, "He thinks he's untouchable. But no man is untouchable forever." And as I whispered it, I felt the truth settle into my bones. The evidence was growing, and soon, I would make sure he choked on it. Once you start looking, you can't stop. Every shadow becomes a clue. Every silence hides a story. And I was looking everywhere now. One afternoon, while he was at work, my daughter asked me to help fold laundry. I carried the basket into their bedroom, and that's when I saw it. His shirt, neatly folded, but the collar was ripped. Not worn, not frayed, torn. I held it up, turning it in my hands, and my stomach twisted. That tear wasn't from wear. It was from force. From a hand clinging desperately while he yanked away. I looked at her, waiting for an explanation, but she kept her eyes on the floor. "It got caught," she said quickly. Too quickly. And then she shoved it deep into the pile, as though burying the truth along with it. Later, while putting dishes away, I noticed a wine glass shoved to the back of the cabinet. The stem was snapped clean in half, jagged and sharp. She said she was clumsy, that it slipped, but the way her eyes darted told me more than her words ever could. I began to feel like a detective in my own daughter's life. But instead of pride, every discovery came with a wave of nausea. I didn't want to collect this evidence. I wanted it not to exist. Yet every broken object, every hidden bruise, every strained smile screamed the same truth. She was living in a prison, and he was the warden. One night, I woke to the sound of muffled voices again. I crept quietly to the vent, heart hammering, pressing my ear against the metal. His voice was sharp but controlled, like a man scolding a child for stepping out of line. Then I heard a thud, something small, maybe a hand against a wall, maybe worse. I froze. My blood boiled, but my legs refused to move. If I barged in, I could make it worse. If I stayed silent, I betrayed her again. I stood there trembling, every muscle in me screaming for action, yet chained by fear of making the wrong move. And then, the sound that broke me. Her whisper, choked and pleading. "I'm sorry, please." That was the moment the guilt nearly swallowed me whole. I pressed my fist to my mouth to stop myself from crying out. She was begging for mercy in her own home, and I, her mother, was crouched in a hallway, powerless. But powerless was a lie. That night, after the house fell silent again, I sat on the edge of my bed with my notebook. I wrote it all down. The thud, the words. The time, the date. My hands shook, but I forced myself to keep going. Because if I didn't, then all of it would vanish into nothing. He thrived in shadows, and my job was to drag him into the light. In the morning, I watched him leave for work, whistling as he grabbed his keys, kissing my daughter on the cheek like nothing had happened. My skin crawled at the sight, but I didn't stop him. Not yet, because I was building something, brick by brick. That afternoon, I sat with my daughter while she made tea. I wanted so badly to scream the truth, to beg her to leave him, to remind her that she wasn't alone. But when I looked at her, I saw it. The exhaustion, the fear, the layers of control wrapped tight around her like chains. If I pushed too hard, she might retreat deeper, convinced she had no escape. So instead, I simply said, "You don't have to tell me everything. But when you're ready, I'll listen. And I'll believe you." Her eyes filled with tears. She nodded but didn't speak. It was enough. For now. Because I had the evidence she couldn't speak aloud. And one day, I would make sure the whole world heard it for her. By the end of that week, I had a small arsenal hidden in my notebook. Dates, times, broken objects. Bruises she thought she covered. Words overheard through vents and walls. Each note was a wound on the page, proof of a war no one else saw. Proof that my daughter's life was not what the world believed, but one night, the evidence found me. I had gone into the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was dark, quiet, the kind of silence that feels almost staged. And then I saw it. Her phone left on the counter again, screen lit up with a soft glow. A message notification. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But something inside me, something desperate, forced my hand. I picked it up and read. It wasn't from him. It was from her friend. The words were simple. "Are you safe? Do you need me to call?" My chest tightened. That one line confirmed what I had feared. Others knew. She had reached out before. She had whispered her truth into the cracks of friendship. And if she had, it meant this wasn't new. This had been happening for longer than she had admitted. I set the phone down, guilt washing over me. But then she appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide. She saw me, saw the phone in my hand, and panic flared across her features. "Don't," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Don't tell him, please." The desperation in her tone nearly broke me. She wasn't just asking for secrecy, she was begging for survival. I nodded slowly, sliding the phone back where I'd found it. "I won't, but sweetheart, you don't have to face this alone." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, she turned away, retreating down the hall like a shadow fleeing the light. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed her friend's message, the bruises, the silence. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into darkness. And somewhere in that darkness, he was waiting, smiling, knowing no one dared to drag him into the open. But he was wrong. The next day, I found something else. A small receipt stuffed into the pocket of his jacket as I helped hang it in the closet. A receipt from a jewelry store. At first I thought maybe it was a gift, a peace offering. But when I looked closer, my stomach dropped. It wasn't for jewelry, it was for a gold chain repair. The note read, "Clasp broken, looks pulled." I imagined it. Her necklace yanked from her neck in anger, the clasp snapping under force. My hand shook as I shoved the receipt into my pocket. Another piece for my collection. Another nail in his coffin. That evening, we sat at dinner again. He talked casually about work, about friends, about weekend plans. My daughter sat silent, nodding, smiling when prompted, her fork pushing food around her plate. I sat across from them, my notebook tucked away upstairs, and I thought about everything I had gathered, every bruise, every broken object, every whisper, every scrap of paper. It was no longer just suspicion. It was truth. A truth heavy enough to bury him, but truth is useless if it stays in the dark. As he poured himself another glass of wine, I leaned back and studied him. He caught my gaze, raising his glass with a smug little grin. He thought I was just a guest in this house, a mother-in-law with no power, but I knew better, because the evidence was no longer just hers. It was mine, and one day soon, I would make sure everyone saw it. The night of the party came dressed in lights and laughter, but beneath it all, I felt the weight of something darker. Their house was alive with people, neighbors, co-workers, friends who thought they knew the happy couple. Music floated through the air, glasses clinked, laughter echoed off the walls. From the outside, it was perfect. Too perfect. I stood near the staircase watching. My daughter moved like a ghost among them, carrying trays of food, smiling politely, her eyes never truly meeting anyone else's. She had perfected her performance. But I knew the truth now, and the truth made her every smile look like a scream trapped in glass. He was the star of the evening, of course. Pouring drinks, shaking hands, charming every soul that crossed his path. His voice carried above the rest, warm and inviting, the kind of voice that fooled strangers into trust. And the more he laughed, the more my stomach twisted. Because I had seen behind the mask, I had heard the venom in that same voice when the audience was gone. I remember gripping the stem of my wine glass, so tight I feared it might snap. Around me, people chatted about promotions, vacations, children. Ordinary lives, and I wanted to scream. Couldn't they see? Didn't they notice the way my daughter flinched when his hand brushed her arm? Didn't they hear the silence behind her smile? At one point, I caught her standing in the hallway, away from the noise, her back pressed against the wall like she was trying to hold herself up. I went to her, touched her arm gently. She jumped, then forced another brittle smile. "You okay?" I whispered. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Always the same words. "I'm fine." Words that meant nothing and everything all at once. Before I could say more, he appeared behind her, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder. "She's wonderful," he announced to no one in particular, his tone too sweet. "Always taking care of everyone, aren't you?" He kissed her temple like a doting husband, but his eyes flicked to mine. Cold. Warning. It was a performance within a performance. I swallowed my rage and stepped back, but inside I was burning. He was bold enough to flaunt his ownership of her in plain sight, certain no one would notice the cage he had built around her. And he was right. They didn't. They laughed, they clapped him on the back, they toasted to his success. But I noticed. I noticed everything. As the night wore on, the evidence of his control became clearer. She never sat down, always moving, always serving. If she lingered too long with one guest, his gaze would find her, sharp and cutting, and she would drift away like a scolded child. He hardly touched her food, but he never failed to fill her glass, as if to remind her she belonged to him. And yet, no one saw. At least, not yet, because as I watched him hold court in his living room, basking in attention, I felt something harden inside me. My notebook upstairs was heavy with evidence, but evidence meant nothing if the world never saw it. This party, his stage, his kingdom, might one day become the place where his mask slipped. Where I would make sure it slipped. The thought was dangerous, thrilling, and terrifying, because when you plot the downfall of a man who believes himself untouchable, you must be willing to risk everything, and I was. I stayed in the background for most of the night watching him perform. He thrived on attention, soaking it in like sunlight, and everyone around him mistook arrogance for charm. I studied every gesture, every laugh, every touch on my daughter's arm. Each move was calculated, like a magician distracting the crowd while hiding the trick in plain sight. But even the best performance has cracks. At one point, he disappeared into the kitchen. A guest had spilled a drink and he went to fetch more towels. My daughter followed him, of course. Always trailing, always tending. Something inside me told me to wait, to give them privacy. But another part of me, the part that had heard muffled cries through vents, that had seen bruises under sleeves, couldn't let them vanish into silence. I slipped toward the kitchen, stopping just outside the doorway. His voice was low, sharp, almost a hiss. "You're embarrassing me," he snapped. I didn't do anything," she whispered. "You never do anything right?" he shot back. Venom hidden beneath the hum of party noise. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might betray me. I gripped the wall, nails digging into plaster. She murmured something I couldn't hear, and then I caught the sound of glass clinking hard against the counter. A warning. I nearly stepped inside, ready to face him right there. But footsteps echoed behind me, a pair of guests heading toward the kitchen. I forced myself to move, to blend, to smile as if I hadn't just heard the truth slip through his mask. When they emerged moments later, he was laughing again, holding a tray of fresh drinks, my daughter trailing behind him with her eyes fixed on the floor. No one noticed her silence. No one cared. But I did. Later in the evening, the music grew louder, the crowd looser with wine. People danced in the living room, clapping, singing along. He was in the center of it, of course, leading them like a conductor with an invisible baton. My daughter stood at the edge, forced smile plastered across her face, clapping off beat, and then it happened. A guest, a little too drunk, stumbled into her, nearly knocking her glass from her hand. She gasped softly, steadying herself, but his reaction was instant. His smile faltered for half a second. His jaw tightened, and his eyes cut to her with a look so sharp it could draw blood. No one else saw it. But I did. That look was enough to freeze her where she stood, enough to remind her of the unspoken rules. She didn't laugh, didn't dance, didn't move again until the music ended. I wanted to grab her hand, pull her out of that house, out of his orbit, out of the suffocating performance he forced her to live in. But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I excused myself, slipped upstairs and into the guest room where my bag sat waiting. I pulled out my notebook, scribbling furiously by the dim light of a lamp. 47 p.m. Kitchen. Words. You never do anything right. Living room. His look, control in public, every detail mattered. Every slip of his mask brought me closer. I closed the notebook and stared at the cover, my reflection faint in the leather. He thought this was his night, his triumph. But one day, this house, these walls, this stage, would host his ruin. And when it did, I would be ready. By the time the clock struck 11, the air in the house was thick with wine and laughter. The guests had settled into groups, telling stories, clinking glasses, leaning in close as though nothing in the world existed beyond their little circle of joy. But I felt it. Beneath the laughter, beneath the music, there was a hum, a quiet, dangerous current. He sat in the center of it all, his arm draped casually over the back of the couch, his voice booming above the chatter. He told stories about work, always stories where he was the hero, the clever one, the man who solved every problem. And the crowd laughed, nodded, applauded. He soaked it in, every cheer another layer of armor around his ego. My daughter sat close by, but not close enough. She perched at the edge of the couch cushion, body stiff, hands folded tight in her lap. She smiled when he did. She laughed when he wanted her to. To everyone else, she was the perfect wife. To me, she was a prisoner in plain sight. I caught her eyes once across the room. Just for a second. And in that second, her mask slipped. The smile faded, the fear surfaced, and she looked at me like a drowning woman staring at the surface of the water, begging to break through, yet terrified to reach. Then he noticed her glance. He leaned toward her, whispered something low. Her shoulders tightened, her gaze dropped, and just like that, the moment was gone. My grip on my wine glass tightened until my hand ached. I could hear the laughter, but it sounded hollow, distant, like echoes in a tunnel. All I could focus on was the sight of my daughter shrinking under his shadow. And then, the smallest detail, a detail no one else would have noticed, snapped something inside me. A guest, tipsy and friendly, placed a hand on her arm as he told her a story. Just a harmless gesture, nothing more. But when I looked back at him, I saw his jaw tighten, his eyes narrow. He hid it quickly, laughing, clapping the man on the back, but I saw the storm brewing in him. It terrified me. Not because of what he might do in that room, surrounded by people, but because of what he would do after the last guest left. I knew, in my gut, that she would pay for every glance, every smile, every perceived mistake. Tonight's party wasn't a celebration. It was a ledger, and she would settle the debt in silence once the lights dimmed. I couldn't breathe. I excused myself again, this time stepping out onto the back porch. The night air was cool against my face, but it did nothing to calm the fire raging inside me. I gripped the railing, staring out into the dark yard, and whispered to myself, I can't let this go on. I can't. When I finally returned inside, the party was winding down. Guests gathered their coats, thanking him for his hospitality, praising my daughter's cooking, oblivious to the truth. I forced a smile, hugged neighbors, played my part. But as I helped gather empty glasses, I caught sight of her again. Her hands were trembling as she stacked plates, her lips pressed tight, her eyes distant. She didn't need to say a word. I knew exactly what she was thinking, and I knew exactly what was waiting for her when the door closed behind the last guest. I carried my notebook upstairs that night with a heaviness in my chest. I sat on the edge of the bed, pen in hand, and wrote the final line for the evening. He is losing control. The cracks are showing, and soon the whole world will see. The party was his triumph, but it would also be his undoing. The morning after the party, the house looked like the aftermath of a storm. Empty glasses, plates with crumbs, chairs pushed at odd angles. But the real storm wasn't in the room. It was in the silence that hung heavy between them. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold, listening. The faint sound of running water upstairs, the muffled shuffle of footsteps. My daughter moved quietly, carefully, as though trying not to wake a sleeping beast. And maybe that's exactly what she was doing. When she came down, her eyes were rimmed red. She tried to cover it with makeup, but I saw the truth. Her hands shook as she poured herself tea, and when I touched her arm, she flinched before forcing a smile. He didn't like something, did he? I whispered. She froze, lips parting, then shook her head too quickly. It was nothing. I'm fine, the same words. Always the same words. But then, as if she couldn't hold it in, her shoulders sagged. She sank into the chair across from me, her hands trembling around the mug. For a long moment she stared at the steam curling into the air, and then she whispered, so softly I almost didn't hear. I don't know how much longer I can do this. My heart cracked. I reached across the table, covered her hands with mine. You don't have to do it anymore, I said. Not alone. Not ever again. She looked up, tears welling. And in that moment, I knew. This was the crack wide enough to let the light in. The evidence I'd been collecting wasn't just scraps anymore. It was a weapon. And now, with her words, with her trust, I had what I needed to strike. That afternoon, while he was gone, I laid it all out. The notebook, the receipts, the broken objects, the words I had overheard. My daughter sat beside me, her hands covering her mouth as the truth unfolded on the table between us. At first, she trembled. Then she wept. And finally, she went quiet. So quiet it scared me. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse but steady. "What do we do with it?" "Not if, not should we. But what do we do?" And that was the moment I knew the tide had turned. "We make sure the mask comes off," I told her, in front of everyone. "No more hiding. No more pretending. He thrives in shadows, but he'll burn in the light." She wiped her tears, nodding slowly, determination flickering like a spark in her eyes. It was dangerous. I knew that. But silence was more dangerous still. That night, as the house fell into its usual performance, him laughing at the television, her serving dinner with a quiet smile, I sat there, heart pounding, my mind already racing ahead. The plan wasn't clear yet, but the end was. The end would be public, undeniable, final, because men like him survive on reputation, on the belief that they are good, charming, respectable. Take that away and they crumble, and I was ready to watch him crumble. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Every smile at the dinner table, every nod during his endless stories, every carefully measured word. I was playing a role as carefully as he was. Except my role wasn't to please him. It was to outwit him. I watched him closer than ever, studying the rhythm of his moods, the patterns in his control. He liked to talk big, especially in front of others. He loved the sound of his own voice. That was his weakness, and I intended to use it. My daughter grew quieter, but not in the way she once had. It wasn't submission anymore. It was planning. She moved like someone holding her breath underwater, waiting for the right moment to break the surface. And I stayed close, giving her silent strength, reminding her with a look that she wasn't alone anymore. The evidence sat heavy in my notebook, thicker than it had been before. Every time I read it back, I felt the rage rise again. But this time it wasn't just rage. It was strategy. Each bruise described, each cruel word recorded, each object broken. It was all part of the story we would tell. The opportunity came faster than I expected. Stripped bare, he decided to host another gathering, smaller, more intimate. A dinner with a handful of colleagues, people who admired him, who saw him as a leader, a man of influence. I saw it in his eyes when he spoke about it. This was his stage, his chance to perform. And it would be ours too. The night of the dinner, I could hardly sit still. My daughter dressed carefully, her hands trembling as she buttoned her blouse. I helped steady her fingers. "Remember," I whispered, "the mask only works if we let it." "Tonight we won't," she nodded, breathing deep, as though bracing for impact. The guests arrived, laughing, chatting, shaking hands. He played the role of gracious host, filling glasses, bragging about his successes, spinning stories that made the room glow with admiration. They laughed when he laughed, nodded when he nodded, hung on his every word. But I was waiting. At the table, as plates were passed and conversation flowed, I leaned forward, my voice calm, steady. "Funny," I said lightly, "how different a man can sound through the walls of this house." The table quieted for a moment, the words hanging in the air like smoke. His eyes cut to mine, sharp warning. He smiled quickly, masking the flash of panic. "She's teasing," he said to the others, chuckling as though I were a silly old woman. But the silence that followed told me they had heard me. And I wasn't finished. I glanced at my daughter. Her hands shook in her lap, but when she looked up, I saw resolve in her eyes. She gave the faintest nod. It was time. I reached into my bag and placed the notebook on the table, its worn cover heavy with truth. "Some of us have been listening," I said, my voice low but clear. "And some of us have been keeping record." The guests shifted in their seats, eyes darting between us. My daughter's breath caught. His smile faltered, and in that fragile pause, I knew we had finally touched the edge of his mask. One wrong move from him, and it would shatter. The night was no longer his performance. It was ours. The notebook sat on the table like a weapon, silent but loaded. His eyes locked on it, the smile draining from his face even as he forced a chuckle. "What is this?" he asked, his voice just a shade too tight, a shade too sharp. No one answered right away. The room felt suddenly smaller, the laughter gone, replaced by the weight of waiting. My daughter's hands trembled, but she didn't look away. For the first time in months, she didn't look away. I slid the notebook closer, my fingers steady. "It's the truth," I said softly. "The truth you've worked so hard to hide." One of his colleagues frowned, glancing between us. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice careful, uncertain. He tried to laugh again, waving a dismissive hand. "She's dramatic. You know how mothers can be." But his eyes, those betrayed him. They darted too fast, flicked too sharp, a man cornered and desperate to keep control. I opened the notebook, flipping to a page filled with dates and descriptions. My handwriting looked almost foreign, like someone else had lived through those nights. But every word was true. I read aloud, voice steady. October 12th, bruise on left arm. Explained as fall downstairs. Heard through vent. You never do anything right. Gasps around the table. Forks clattered softly against plates. My daughter sat frozen, but her eyes brimmed with tears. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound so loud it made some of the guests jump. "Enough," he barked. "You don't know what you're talking about." But I didn't flinch. I leaned closer, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. And so does she." All eyes turned to my daughter. She sat trembling, her lips parting as if to speak. For a long moment, no sound came. Then, with a breath that shook her whole body, she whispered, "It's true." The words were soft, but they hit the room like thunder. His face went pale, then flushed with anger. "Lies," he spat. "She's confused, But she cut him off. For the first time, she cut him off. No, no more lies. Her voice was stronger now, steadier, as though the dam inside her had finally broken. "I've been living in fear every single day. I've hidden bruises. I've hidden tears. And you—" She turned to him, her voice trembling but fierce. "You don't get to hide anymore." The silence that followed was suffocating. His colleagues stared at him, shock plain on their faces. The perfect mask he had built for years was gone in an instant, shattered by the voice of the woman he thought would never speak. I placed a gentle hand over hers, steadying her, anchoring her. "You're not alone," I whispered. He pushed back his chair, his face twisted with fury, but he knew. He knew it was over. The whispers had already started among his friends, doubt seeping into the cracks of his reputation. The evidence, the testimony, the eyes on him. It was a spotlight he couldn't escape, and for the first time, he was the one shrinking. When the dinner ended, it wasn't with laughter or applause. It ended in silence, in shame, in the sound of reputations unraveling. Guests left quickly, murmuring awkward goodbyes, eyes avoiding his. My daughter and I sat together in the quiet afterward, the notebook still on the table. She leaned against me, her body trembling, and I held her tight. "It's over," I whispered, and for the first time, she believed me.